If you're sitting there single, your dating isn't going well, you're not meeting the sort of women you want to, you're not creating the kind of connection on dates, the chances are you're doing most of these things in a way that is counteractive. The most important information that's being communicated, be that on apps, on profiles, in person, on dates, is the one of the number one complaints that I hear from women is like, men are just really boring. They don't know how to have conversation. They don't know how to bring this depth. They don't know how to respond to things. Women relate to you as like nice, but often just really forgettable because they don't feel you. They don't have a depth of experience of you. I'm going to be rejected. I'm not good enough. They don't want to hear my feelings and emotions. Women will judge me if I ask what I want. All that stuff that goes to your head constantly. 3 things you can do to fix this. The number one mistake men make, and you should probably write this down, is Welcome back to another mini episode of my podcast, The Authentic Man with David Chambers, me. And today we're talking about this number one problem that men keep making in their dating lives, right? And 3 ways to fix it. I've been a dating coach for the best part of 15 years, and I've seen what it takes to create the sort of relationship you want, to get the sort of dates you want, and even to have, the hookups if that's your thing, right? And so often I used to watch men in bars and clubs and even on dates, right? When I was just like hanging out with friends and seeing people in bars, in restaurants, and I would see this mistake, time and time again. So I'm going to break it down for you, the components of it and what you can do about it, right? Because so often as men, we think that the problems we're having in dating come down to not being wealthy enough, right? Not being good looking enough, not being tall enough, not having the right, the right clothes, or all these superficial things that we see in other men and think that's the thing we need to have. Or we can't figure out the algorithm on the dating apps, right? Or worse still, we blame women in. It's like there's no good women. All women are cooked. I keep seeing this phrase, cooked. It makes me laugh, right? And the truth of it's not that, right? The number one mistake men make, and you should probably write this down, right, is how you communicate, be that on dating apps, in person, right, on dates, or when you're just, hanging around when there's women around, right? It's in your body, right? It's in your energy. It's when you're listening, and it's the way you judge women, right? And judge what you're hearing. This is really important. Most men can't communicate with range and like a depth of feeling, a playfulness, a lightness, like being deeply felt in what they've said and also deeply feeling the other person. That's all in the range of communication, right? But also they lack the presence and the healthy detachment from their ego and their ego stories to create the sort of attraction and deep connection they really desire. Now that sounds like a really big thing, but it's communication, and it's the levels of communication, right? Because I see this so often. I see men's dating profiles and I read them and I'm like, I almost yawn. They're really boring and dry. They're really factual. There's no feeling. There's no depth. There's no playfulness. And they're like, oh, this is the best I can do. And then I ask, how long did it take to write? And they say like 5 minutes, right? And it's because they're not even kind of trying to get deep into who they are. So we're going to break this down. But before we jump in, I'm going to tell you about my online program that you can jump into, the Men's Dating Accelerator, or MDA, as I like to call it, right? And this is where you're going to learn not just these points I've talked about, but we'll train you how to really communicate powerfully, boldly, with the emotional range, with the playfulness, with the lightness, and also be able to be present enough to respond to what she's feeling and what she's communicating. So you're responding in a way that's appropriate and right, and you're not missing the signals and cues, which is what most men do, right? They miss the most important information that's being transmitted, that's being communicated, be that on apps, on profiles, in person, on dates, when they're approaching women. And this is what means that there's no spark, there's no connection, right? You think it's the looks, right? But it's all these deeper things that you don't even notice because you're not aware of it, right? Meaning that you don't think it's important because you're not aware of it. You don't know about it. And in the program, that's just one module. We take you all the way through that. And then the other modules about leadership, about how to create more of a social life. So you're meeting more women day to day. You're meeting beautiful women in your normal life, and really tackling the mental demons, right, that are keeping you confined and frustrated, right, and sitting here consuming loads of information about dating instead of getting out and talking to real women and helping you build the confidence to do that. So Back to the episode. We're going to break down the 7, because there's 7 pillars of communication, right? And you need to have an understanding and depth in each of these. And I want you to listen to this episode, not from the perspective of, oh yeah, I'm doing that, right? Because if you're sitting there single and your dating isn't going well, or not going the way you want it to, you're not meeting the sort of women you want to, you're not creating the kind of connection on dates, the chances are you're doing most of these things in a way that is counteractive to what you're trying to get. So number 1, clarity and congruence, right? Most men do not express themselves clearly. They think they might be expressing themselves clearly, but they're kind of jumbling things together that don't necessarily mean very much when they're saying it, right? Their communication is confusing. Their communication is out of alignment with their nonverbal cues, their physical body, the way they're speaking, the tone of voice, the body language, the facial expressions. And what we don't realize, it creates confusion for people when they're talking to us, because we're saying one thing and our face is doing another thing and our body's doing another thing, and it just doesn't feel congruent. It feels uncomfortable. You've had that experience with people, right? Where you're like, oh, they're saying I'm fine, but actually their face is like, they're looking around the room. They can't make eye contact. They're scrunched up. You're like, oh, this feels uncomfortable because I can't trust this person. This is what women feel, right? If you're like, I'm fine. Yeah, I've had a great day. You're an untrustworthy man, right? You're not trustable because you're saying one thing and your whole body's communicating another thing. And really, she's listening to your body, because that's the thing that really is communicating most of the real information. So you become untrustworthy, meaning that she doesn't believe that she can trust you later on. And she might not know this consciously, but in those moments, she doesn't feel the connection between the two of you because there's a disconnection internally within you. And this is a really important thing, right? Because it might look like for you talking in hints, right? Or you're hinting at things instead of asking her, say, do you want to go on a second date? You're talking in hints, a second date would be, we can have fun on a second date instead of just asking, right? Or sarcasm, right? This is a kind of shady one, like where you want to tell a joke, but you're just being sarcastic, or maybe there's something you don't like about it, so you're being sarcastic, or the next one, passive aggressive about it. It's these indirect ways of speech, right? Really get in the way of connection and clarity. And obviously there's playfulness, and that's a different type of thing where, being playful in communication, right? But this is something I see time and time again, right? With men as well. And also dodging conversation to avoid anything that feels like conflict or could be rejection, right? That's another one. Again, you become untrustworthy, right? She feels you as being uncertain, unclear, a lack of confidence, a lack of knowing what you want. All really unattractive things, right? Ultimately. The next point, active listening. Now, this is about being fully there, listening to what's being said, right? Paying attention, not so you can respond or interrupt, but that you're showing you really heard what someone said, like listening intently. This is something I really learned really deeply. I thought I was good at this before, right? I thought I was really good at this. Women used to always say I'm a great listener. But when I started to coach people, it took it to a new level, right? Because I was practiced and trained to listen to people. And I realized people don't listen to each other, right? We often listen to reply, listen to respond, listen to tell our opinion about what's being said, right? Or we, instead of listening to what's being said and the feeling underneath, we just jump to a conclusion, right? Or sorry, a solution and conclusion sometimes as well. Or worse still, we're listening, but we're feeding it all through our negative opinions of ourselves and her and women and men, whatever dynamic you're in, right? So you're thinking like, oh, she's telling me that she likes to go to parties. And you're like, oh, she's just another party girl who gets drunk every weekend and doesn't want anything serious. She didn't say that. She said she likes to she went to a party that she enjoyed. Or even in non-verbal cues, you're like, oh, she's looking away. That means she doesn't like me. God, I'm not good enough. Oh, another woman thinks I'm not good enough. And then you respond with that energy. And this is a massive problem in dating. People are filtering through people's actions and words through their own filter of meaning making, right? And then we respond to that. And then we wonder why the very thing we don't want to happen happens, because we've created the meaning in our heads like someone doesn't like us, someone doesn't care about us, they don't want us. And then we create that, we add that meaning, we start to push that person in that direction, right? And often what happens is the person you're dating, she's going to feel invisible, misunderstood, a lack of emotional connection because you're not feeling her. You're not noticing, you're not paying attention to the emotion and feeling underneath what she's saying. So if she's talking about her job and she might be like, you know, I really enjoy my job, but you're like, the body language is all off because you don't notice the body language or you don't notice the tone. You don't go, oh, actually, are you sure you enjoy your job? It's just like the way you're saying it and the way you're sitting, it doesn't really feel like that's really the case. And she might respond with like, yeah, actually, you're right. Like, I feel like I have to say I enjoy my job because I'm on a date. And then you might get into really beautiful conversation about how on dates we feel like we have to have this like perfect life, right? But if you're just hearing the words because you're too preoccupied with your own bullshit, right? Your fears, your worries, your anxieties, you lack presence, you're all up in the head, you've missed an opportunity for connection. And I see this time and time again with men, right? They're so in their head, fears, worries, anxieties, judgments about themselves and how they're not good enough, that they don't really listen to people. So they'll hear someone talk this whole thing and then they're just like, yeah, cool, that's nice. And you're like, wow, how did none of that impact you in a way that you had something reasonable to say? And this is one of the number one complaints that I hear from women is like, men are just really boring. They don't know how to have conversation. They don't know how to bring this depth. They don't know how to respond to things. You know, they make everything into a joke instead of like noticing the emotion that's present and feeling. And you do that with active listening. And this third one, right? Which is about emotional attunement and empathy. Again, this is something we really lack, but it's a communication aspect, emotional attunement and empathy, right? The ability to sense and understand and feel and respond to the feelings that are there, right? I know this is really connected to active listening for me, but it's like being attuned to the emotional context, subcontext, environment, and even like the subcontext. Let me explain that. So someone who's talking about their day, right? And she's like, I had to walk down this really dark alley and I was really a little bit concerned, blah, blah, blah. There's some concern there. But the subcontext is that she's a woman walking down a dark alley, right? With centuries and millennia of pain and rape and sexual assault that have occurred to women. That's a subcontext that as men, we're not always aware of, right? And I used a really obvious example there, but it could just be, you know, you might say, oh, you've got nothing to worry about. You know, London's really safe these days. And you've completely ignored the subcontext, which means for her, she's like, this man doesn't really get what it's like to be a woman in this world. Okay, how safe am I with this guy? Because he's just discounting my, you know, my subcontext. The problem here for a lot of guys is they're missing all these cues, these emotional cues. Emotional cues are so important, right? Which can leave her feeling kind of uncomfortable, lacking in safety, like lacking in like this man is really present. Because what happens when men aren't present emotionally with a woman, we basically follow through on a script of what we want to do and what we desire, right? And ultimately that's where rape happens a lot, in my opinion. A man is not connected to the woman in front of him. He's connected to his lust and his desire and what he wants. So he's transgressing boundaries. Yeah, because you're not emotionally attuned. So you become an unsafe man, right? And that might sound heavy, but it's important for a lot of you guys to realize this. Even if you are 5'2", you still land as an unsafe man, right? Because there's this like, what I could say, almost epigenetic feeling for a lot of women around safety and men, especially for women who've been from really traumatic experiences, which is most women, right? So how does this problem kind of sound? It can sound like you kind of belittling someone else's feelings and emotions, receiving her maybe a distressing emotion, pain, difficulty or something like that. And instead of like acknowledging it, you just kind of gloss over it, or saying that maybe feelings are something's not a big deal when she's feeling it, right? Because you don't want to really stay there. Instead of acknowledging it as like a big deal. It's something that happens a lot, right? Or there's the opposite of this, which is over-identifying with the emotions. Her emotions are being overly reactive, which is one of the points we're going to talk about later. Being overly reactive and losing your own groundedness. Because there's a balance, right? There's a balance of like being grounded and present while also being aware of her emotions, right? So it's like, I'm aware that I'm sitting here, you're listening to me, blah, blah, blah. I've got emotions of nerves, worry, but I'm not engulfed by the nerves and worry that they are just taking up my whole experience. They're just there in the background, that I've acknowledged them and I notice them. They're not my whole experience. And I think that's something that as men, we often become very reactive, because the emotion becomes our experience and we're no longer grounded even in ourselves, even in the moment. And then we just become over-identified with emotions and we become really reactive, right? Not responsive. Responding to someone's feelings, like, oh, I noticed that actually it sounds like that made you feel quite sad. Responsive. Reactive is, oh shit, what have I done to make her sad? I did something to make her sad. I need to change something. I need to do something. That's the conversation you have in your head. Reactive versus responsive. Noticing and so forth. And this can lead to you feeling jittery, erratic, even cold and shut down if you're not really responding to the feelings and emotions, and like you're not really on the same wavelength. You can go for a whole date and not really feel connected, no spark, no intimacy, like just this, like almost like you're missing each other and you'll have to explain things, a lot. Next one, number 4. Openness and vulnerability. So this is an important one, right? Because there's a lot of talk about openness and vulnerability, and maybe I would call this openness and revealing. A revealing is something that I've been talking about a bit on my Instagram and even on my newsletter. It's like this opening up to allow people to see the various layers of who you are, or opening up to allow someone into your inner world. So that's like expressing your inner world, your thoughts, your fears, your needs, your desires, your past, your future you desire, right? Without it having to be polished and perfect, right? Revealing. And what I see a lot of men do is they stick to like banter and jokes and small talk, like making things into a joke, like because there's an uncomfortability with going deeper. Kind of this belief around, I need to be a man, I need to be like strong and unaffected by everything and like, strong all the time. What's the other one I see around this not revealing is just like being really quiet and not really expanding on things. It's just like, I talked about work, but didn't go any deeper about how I feel about my work, the story about how I got into my work, the funny things that happen at work. And the conversation feels boring and dry. Women relate to you as like nice, but often just really forgettable because they don't feel you. They don't have a depth of experience of you, right? And I guess the vulnerability, openness and revealing is also playfulness, like revealing that there's a part of you that is playful, is joyful, has multiple layers to you, right? That is sarcastic, irrelevant, like fun and jokey, deep and really feeling, very introspective. And because you don't reveal these parts of you, she just feels you as being bland, boring and nice. And nice is not how you really want to be described. And I see this with so many guys I speak to because they're afraid of expressing themselves and being judged negatively. And really what happens when you don't express, you're judged far more negatively, right? And obviously there's a subsect of guys who they have the opposite problem. They're too much in the expressing. They're too much in the, as I said in one of the other points, they're too much in the feeling of the moment and they're not grounded. Yeah. And they're not grounded in the moment. And there's this lovely balance. Like we can swing, right? During a date, during an interaction, to being like really taken by the feeling and to be super grounded. But that's range that I mentioned before, having that range of feeling, that range of expression that is really attractive, right? That most men just really don't have. And they can't be, as I've talked about in the before points, they don't know how to respond to the moment appropriately. Like there's a sadness that she's expressed, or you feel the sadness to express. So they're nervous, like, oh my gosh, there's sadness there. I don't want to talk about that because I don't want to talk about sadness because I'm uncomfortable with sadness, right? Or they tell a sad story and maybe there's a story for you that's similar. Maybe someone passed, a grief, and you're like, oh man, I think I understand and imagine how you feel because what happened to me was in my life, right? But they're afraid to reveal and open up because they're afraid of the judgment. Or they don't even notice the sadness that's there, or they're overreacting to the sadness because they don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to respond, right? They become too reactive. And then you miss these moments of connection, right? And you can see how these pillars all interweave and make conversation really boring and dry and shit, basically. Number 5, feedback and repair. Addressing issues with kindness and specificity, right, is really important. And this can probably be in like later stage of dating, but it can come up early on. Is like addressing issues with like kindness, specificity, not attacking character. And sometimes this happens in the mind, right? Someone's late and then you're like, they don't value me. They don't value my time. They don't think I am worthy, so they're wasting my time. That's this feedback you have in your head. And instead of addressing it, you suppress it. You don't say anything. You don't communicate it. So then you're being passive aggressive all the time because you don't have the balls, so we say, to have like the address the thing like, hey, you were late today again. You know, I know sometimes we're late. Like, is this maybe there's a playful way to ask like, oh, what happened there? Did you lose your cat? Did you forget your homework? Right? And then we can have a conversation. They might be like, oh, this is something I'm actually often late. Or we keep arranging these dates that are really close to my work finishing time. So I just could do with another half an hour and that means I wouldn't be late. And you're like, oh, you see, we just address the issue instead of attacking their character in your head, or worse still, projecting that their actions have some meaning about you. Really important. This can cause defensiveness, right? If we start to think, someone's attacking us or they are belittling us in some way, right? Shutting down. It can even cause people ghosting, right? Because there's a tension they want to address. Like maybe she asked you what you're looking for, where you want this to go. And you couldn't be in the feedback and go, oh, actually what I'm looking for is X, Y, and Z. So instead of, you shut down, you stop talking, you emotionally shut down, your words stop coming, you don't know what to say, you become overthinking in the head. And then you might ghost because you don't want to have that conversation, or it might be in messages. This has happened. And what this really causes is that small conflict or small imagined conflict, imagined conflict, never gets repaired and spirals and becomes a drama or becomes something you never talk about or that you disconnect because of, right? And let me think of some examples around this. Like I see this a lot with the avoidant men I work with. They're dating someone and they're unsure if it's the right person. I'm having doubts. I'm not sure. And instead of being like, hey, I'm really enjoying our time, but like I have this story in my mind that, I'm not sure if we're right for each other because you like to do these things and blah, blah, blah. So instead of having that conversation, the small talk in their head, the conflict in their head arises and they just distance because they don't feel comfortable with opening up and revealing, previous point, opening up and showing emotion, right? And leaning into the discomfort of having a conversation, right? And you're starting to see, right, they're all really interlinked. If you really interlinked, right? You might say I'm good at one of these, but these are really interlinked. The next one, reactivity. This is a really big one, right? This is about your ability to kind of manage heightened emotions, anger, frustration, anxiety, stress, defensiveness, inadequacy, basically any emotion, and do so from a place that is present, this moment, here, now, rather than reacting from these kind of the ego state, the stories and negative beliefs about yourself. I'm not good enough. Standard one. I'm not good enough. There's a right way and I don't know how. I'm unlovable. I'm going to be abandoned. Those are the sort of kind of core ego stories or negative beliefs we hold about ourselves. And we're responding from those. Like if I'm responding to someone who I feel is criticizing me from I'm not good enough, that gets triggered, that I'm not good enough story, and I become defensive or I become counterattacking. Or it could be that I shut down because I'm like, oh my God, again, I've been proved to be not good enough. Or the story is like, no, I am good enough. And then we have to like push back and defend when in fact, maybe someone isn't even attacking us. Maybe they're just expressing how they feel and we're taking it as an attack, for example, right? Another couple of example is becoming kind of overwhelmed on dates because someone said something, like, oh, they talked about their ex. They talked about their ex having a really good job. And you become anxious, You feel inferior. You feel, there's not a feeling of not good enough. I guess that's inferior, right? And then you become overwhelmed by the anxiety and the inferiority feeling, and you stop talking. You become overwhelmed and you shut down, right? Such an example. And then this is reactivity, because they've just said something and then you've personalized it. Like, this is about me. Okay, this is about me. That means that I'm now comparing. It's another thing that happens in our mind. Comparison. You've compared yourself to their past partner and they're better, and now you feel like a piece of shit. When none of this is actually happening, they've just expressed some stuff about their life, right? Example. Or another aspect of this reactivity is where like a minor issue gets blown up and kind of splits, like heated. Again, it's often because of defensiveness. Or let's use the lateness, for example. They say, you're often late. And you're like, no, I'm not. I've always got a reason, I've got a reason for being late because this happened. And all they're doing is telling you a fact. Oh, no, I wasn't. I was early that time, suddenly become defensive. And then maybe you fire back and go, but you're always late. You were late with my messages and da. And you see there that even that counterattack is often a thing that's bothered you in the past that you haven't talked about, right? When we talk about avoiding things due to rejection or conflict, you see how these are all really intermingled. So it can also be freezing, emotional shutdown, as I talked about, when there's tension. Maybe there's a moment where there could be conflict, like you're having a conversation about what you're looking for in dating, and you're so worried about saying the wrong thing or saying the thing that means that she doesn't want to be with you or see you again, that you start to shut down emotionally. You don't talk. You're worried that she's going to judge you. You're worried that you're not going to be good enough. You're worried she's going to abandon you if you tell the truth, whatever it is. So you shut down. Yeah. What does this cause? This causes emotional ups and downs in your dating life, in dates, in relationships, right? Things become unstable, emotionally unstable, and actually it creates drama. Especially shutting down creates drama. These things, reactivity creates drama, and we don't think we're creating a drama, but we are creating the drama, right? And it just means that you become a really difficult person to be with, right? Number 7, this is the last one. Really important. Mutual intention and shared meaning, right? This is how we can create a lot of really powerful connection, where you create an intention, right, for even the dates you go on, and they have a shared meaning via discussing things, right? And also about the shared meaning and direction of where things are going, right? So like, it's one of the common problems is avoiding talking about what you want and where you want maybe dating someone to go, right? Saying things like, let's just see where it goes. Let's try and avoid the commitment, which is often because there's an uncomfortability with commitment and emotional stuff. Yeah. Avoiding of conversations about deeper values and deeper visions, because you don't get that shared meaning that brings you closer together, because you're still on these two islands, because you're too worried about, if we talk about a vision, I talk about my vision for a relationship, she's going to think I want to marry her, or she's going to think that, she's going to put herself in there and then I'm going to be locked in and forever I can't get out of it, when you still have agency just to say, hey, I don't want to date you anymore. You might avoid that because you don't want to have the conflict of having to say no to someone and then question you and feel uncomfortable. And we're back to some of the other points around communication and conflict and fears. And sometimes this one comes up because there's a hidden agenda you have of like maybe wanting closeness without any commitment, but don't want to say that. You don't want commitment at all, but you've lied, for instance. And what this causes in dating is these shallow connections. Shallow connections mismatches drama too, because if someone keeps feeling like, you're avoiding the question of where it's going to go, you're building this tension that you can both feel, right? Or you will definitely feel if you're trying to avoid it. And it just causes things to drift, or it causes like explosive conversations. And I know this because it's happened to me loads of times in dating. So 3 things you can do to fix this. And as I say again, everything we do in the Men's Dating Accelerator is all in here, right? These are really important aspects. So the first thing is building nervous system presence. How do we build nervous system presence? This is something you have to practice daily through breath practice, embodiment practice, being with uncomfortable feelings and emotions in the body and staying grounded, right? And this is why this isn't like just something you're likely to just know how to do on your own. This is why I built, like I said, the Men's Dating Accelerator. Inside there's multiple practices guiding you into this very thing, into this grounded presence. Sometimes it's spacious. You can see a problem is really small. Sometimes it spikes the challenge and discomfort in the body while staying grounded and breathing and present, right? These are the sort of things that you need to practice that make a difference, right? To the nervous system, to kind of strengthen it, to be present, to be here in the moment when you need it to be. Or you're going to get lost in your feelings. You're going to get overwhelmed by emotions. You're going to shut down. You're going to get overreacted because you haven't trained your nervous system to be with the discomfort, the uncomfortable emotions. Because dating is a process of uncomfortable emotions, and how you manage those uncomfortable emotions internally, sometimes externally coming towards you, will dictate how your dating life goes. That's the biggest dictator in my eyes. How you respond and react to things will dictate how your dating life goes. So that's number one thing you need to do. Number two is you need to practice emotional range. This is incredibly important because most men's range is like this. They're boring, they're dry, they're like, okay, they're monotone. You know, I can't even do that because that's just not how I communicate, because people don't feel you. They don't feel your joy. They don't feel the emphasis on the stories you're telling. They don't feel your desire. They don't feel your happiness. What they feel is hiding, collapsing, and even a lack of trust, or just, you just felt it was being boring, right? Because you don't feel you can express yourself. So some of that is like speaking. Some of it's learning to really feel the emotions in your body, how they land, how you feel them, where they show up. Really important, so that you can name them and you can give them words. And then some of it is actually in how your body, how free your body feels, you know, to express. So that, again, working on that is really important. And then the last thing, the third thing, is kind of detaching from the ego, right? Detaching from the stories in the mind, the mental stories you tell yourself of like, I'm going to be rejected. I'm not good enough. They don't want to hear my feelings and emotions. Women will judge me if I ask what I want. You know, all that stuff that goes through your head constantly. You know, the inner critic is a really good example of the stuff that's going through your head. Because this just gets in the way of authentic communication. It kind of comes in belief that, you know, often the ego acts as if it knows everything. It knows how everything's going to go and you need to follow it, the stories it tells you, and it doesn't know shit. It's just trying to predict the future to keep you safe, not to help you thrive in connection. And this is a really important aspect I think a lot of men don't realize. And then they project their ego stories onto the world and they say, this is true. No women want commitment. Women don't want good men. And they do believe that that story isn't a truth, right? They just made it up and then they project it onto reality. And then what does that story do? Keeps you safe from taking risks. Keeps you safe from expressing your heart, keeps you safe from entering in the connection where you might be rejected, but it actually keeps you lonely as well, right? So that's much longer than I expected. Yeah, this is a big one. I think this is a really big problem in dating, and even into relationships, not just dating, into relationships as well. If you don't solve these things, then your relationship will be chaotic as well. So like I said, all of this stuff is really covered deeply in practice, in exercise, in guidance, in teachings inside the Men's Dating Accelerator. And if you're interested in that, it's in the show notes down below. You can just click the button, click a little link, and you can buy it. It's only £47, which is a bargain because when I ran it live, the guys were paying £300 for it. So, you know, and there's also options if you want to do some online, there's some online dating bits that you can plug in as well. If you're interested in that sort of thing, you need to really help with your profile and messaging and stuff. There's an add-on for that as well. But that's enough for me today. And I say, ciao, ciao.